First of all, it is time for our Future Politics panel.
The Future Politics panel.
There you go, the Future Politics panel. Joining me this morning, I'm delighted to say, Jonathan Gibson, political commentator, also Reem Ibrahim, who's a Conservative commentator. Good morning and Happy New Year.
Good morning.
I absolutely love that introduction. That is fantastic.
Which one? What?
The introduction of the Future Politics
have you
panel.
seen that before?
I have not seen
it's
it.
new.
It is amazing.
Tom made it.
Tom is great.
He's very good, isn't he?
Very
no,
good.
no, Tom didn't make it. Tom asked someone else to make it. But anyway, so that's quite an interesting question. Rishi Sunak, or Charlie Mullins, or James Dyson, or Richard Branson. Who would you have, John?
I'll be honest, I don't know enough about the other three to really make an informed decision.
Very good
so I'm
political
going to have
answer.
to try, duck this as much as I wouldn't normally.
Okay.
I'd go with Richard Branson. I think he knows a bit about money, a bit about the money tree. He understands.
Interesting. So just in terms of, and this is on my Twitter, in terms, Rishi Sunak's coming last at the moment, which is quite interesting
Expected.
in itself. Richard Branson is next, and then we've got Charlie Mullins. James Dyson, the entrepreneur, is on 70%. But it just got me thinking, just in terms of where we're going. Let me just ask you that, Jonathan. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak said, we're, only idiots, this comment, only idiots would think that we can cut tax. We are currently living in a 70-year tax burden high, and it seems to me that we're in managed decline. Does that make me an idiot because I want to cut tax?
No, I think it's all about what sort of tax you want to cut, the way you want to go about it, because at the same time, we are going through a cost of living crisis, and maybe what Rishi's hearing and trying to disregard is calls to, slash taxes for just the super wealthy and, keep them for poorer people. And I think with Liz Truss, with the 45% tax bracket, that seemed to be a sentiment that wasn't so popular among lots of people because it did feel quite unfair. So I think, again, it's about the way you go about it. I wouldn't have a problem as long as I think it's done in a redistributionary manner, in a way which doesn't hurt people further, and in a way which, we can keep sustainable pressure and sustainable living, because, we are facing lots of strikes, we are facing lots of pressures. We need to have money in the Treasury, but we also need to support people during the cost of living crisis.
I mean, Reem, if you look at the United Kingdom, in terms of inflation, it is starting to come down. I think it's now at 10.3%. It was 10.5 or 10. Thereabouts. But we're doing far worse than the rest of Europe. So it seems to me that we're hamstrung by really high taxes. That then in itself drives inflation. What would you do?
Well, absolutely. I think the fact that we have a Conservative government, we've got 12 years of Conservative government. At the moment, we've got the highest tax burden in 70 years, to me, is a complete abysmal sort of state of the Conservative Party, and it really does show actually that the state of conservatism itself has, I think, completely gone down the toilet with this party. What I'm particularly interested in, however, is the fact that people like Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, I don't know if you guys saw that coffee cup video when he was trying to explain inflation. Of course, inflation is a result of Russia, Ukraine, COVID, all of these external factors. Nothing to do with government policy, apparently. The fact that the Bank of England have been printing money like sweets, increasing the money supply, increasing the amount of money that we have, that's chasing goods. That is the reason why we have such high levels of inflation. And the fact that the government are incapable of seeing that it's their own policies that have caused it, I think is just absurd.
So let me ask you very quickly, in terms of the Conservative Party, you have your ear to the ground. What's the chatter in the party?
The chatter in the party, a lot of young people, especially the young Conservatives, who feel incredibly disillusioned with the party. There is nothing Conservative about this Conservative government. Let's be clear about that. We've got the highest tax burden in 70 years, but not only on economic policy. The Rishi Sunak seems to not sort of have any way forward when it comes to the tax burden. I think he doesn't really understand the way to grow the economy. Us young people really have, not many prospects at all. Taxes sort of, increasing on the young, hard-working people. But of course, things like the triple lock on pensions, the energy price guarantee, those policies that are spending throwing so much money at our institutions, and actually we're the ones that are going to be paying for it.
Jonathan, which party do you see have most faith in for young people? Because I think it's pretty dismal as an outlook, being young at the moment.
No, definitely, it is dismal. I do disagree quite strongly with Reem on that point. I think there's a lot of ways in which, Liz Truss was proven wrong. Like, she didn't, the cutting, rapidly slashing taxes wasn't the right approach, and I think the market showed that, and we do still have inflation.
She refused to cut spending at the same time. That's, I think, the primary issue with Liz Truss, and that's what Sunak is refusing to do as well. He is sort of, again, with the NHS, NHS, for example, again, promising to throw billions more of our taxpayer money at these broken institutions.
But there's lots of places which need money. I'm not saying Rishi's necessarily dishing it out in the right way, but we've got strikes, we've got lots of places which need money. I don't think you can simply say we're going to cut taxes. Inflation is still high. 10.3% is still well above the 2% target.
But, so go back to my question: which of the parties currently do you most side with, align to?
Labour for sure.
And why?
Oh, certainly. On a whole range of policies, I think, ethically and morally, I think the Conservatives are really, really hamstrung, whether it's, even the stupid, parking fine, Nadeem Zahawi's tax stuff, there's so many things, people being investigated constantly, there's constant, just unethical behaviour and things which really bring the party in disrepute. I think I disagree with them in terms of their approach to economics. I think they're not focused enough on redistribution and supporting people in the cost of living crisis. I think there's lots of infighting and they're sort of splintering apart. I just do not think it's a solid party. I think the strikes are just really their policies sort of coming home to roost, and they haven't really found a way to deal with it. And it's not necessarily that Rishi Sunak is the worst leader in the world, in my opinion, but I just think it's time for a change.
But just in terms of Labour's position, I'm not really sure what their position is on strikes. I think they're very quiet on that.
No, of course they're quiet. I think they're definitely taking a more centre-left approach, in a sense. They're not coming out and really full out supporting the picket lines. I think they probably would negotiate with some and try to resolve some of the tensions, but they can't lose sort of the middle class support who aren't particularly supportive of the strikes, except for the nurses. I think with the nurses there is overwhelming support for them, but according to the majority of the population, the polls are all showing that there's not massive support for lots of the other strikes. They are just playing it tactically in a way to win. They're not necessarily so ideologically principled, but they will have a shot of winning, in my opinion, as a result.
They get their money from the unions. That's why they're not criticising them in the same
less
way.
Less
of it, but it's still a huge majority of the Labour Party's money, and a lot of Labour MPs individually get a lot of their campaign money from unions. So I think that we've got to the Conservative Party, their finances are something to look at as well.
Yeah, they get it from corporate.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what is very interesting is there is such flux and turmoil, I think, within the voters and the electorate, because as we heard, Claire Muldoon saying she has no idea who she'd vote for at the moment. I think people are re-looking at all the parties and trying to work out the one that most appeals to them. And I think we're going to see more and more of this as we come into the general election. We have currently a by-election taking place. So it will be very interesting. By-elections are never a good barometer of general election success, but I'm not sure still that Starmer has... I think he by default is doing well. I'm still not sure there's the vision there, but he certainly seems more statesman-like now.
I mean, he's got his act together a bit, and he's realised what you can't be from his predecessor. You cannot be super ideologically bound to a tiny corner which hardly any of the population subscribe to. So on things like Brexit, on things like immigration, healthcare, on things such as even the approach to the police, I would say, is more principled, more thought out, and more measured than the Conservative Party. He's appearing quite reasonable, I think. I don't think people on the right are going, he's, some crazy communist kind of guy. Like, he's quite reasonable and quite measured, and I think he will win a lot of support. I think there's still a lot of undecided voters, and a lot of people are completely unsure, and, predicting, 2 years ahead is just, I think everyone's seen as quite silly, because anything could happen in that time.
Literally.
Can I just very quickly look on that point? So I think with West Streeting, for example, when it comes to the NHS...
I'm glad you brought him up, actually.
Because I think that what's quite interesting, actually, is the Conservative... we sort of talk about the NHS and how it's this huge bureaucratic black hole that we keep throwing money at, but actually it's politically impossible for the Conservative Party to do anything about the NHS. What I found quite shocking, actually, or quite pleasantly surprising, is that West Streeting recognises that the need for institutional reform, and actually the need for huge amounts of that reform, and actually I think they politically can't do it.
You're absolutely right. That's the bit where I actually thought, goodness, they've thought this through. It's not about money. And he starts talking in my language about reforming it. It needs massive change. And we know that. Renee, who's just stepped out of the room, she knows that. We all know that. We talked this morning about how complicated it is to discharge patients out of hospital. It's not just about social care. And so I was pleased to hear that. Let's just move on. You're young, crazy kids. Let's talk about the coronation, because this could be a fantastic celebration. I am deeply concerned when I read this morning that King Charles III is going to put refugees and the NHS at the heart of a diverse coronation, bringing the nation together in a 3-day celebration. Is that really the right thing? Is that what we want?
It's all about balance, you know. There are ways in which Britain has changed since 1953, which was the last coronation. As a monarchist myself, you know, I think that it's important for monarchists. The reason I'm a monarchist is largely because I think it's important that you can have a representative who's not politically bound up and isn't politically involved, and so can represent Britain on the world stage without, you know, having certain leanings and whatever. So I think the king just need to be careful of that. At the same time, you know, reflecting a more modern Britain and changing the image slightly through, you know, not wearing necessarily stockings and breechings, but wearing his military uniform.
I think it's sad, actually.
You've got a tradition there in the fact that the actual ritual is taking place, and the fact that we've still got on a monarchy, and the fact that, you know, politicians being invited, there's certain traditions. He will come in traditional garments. You know, I think having some sort of mixture is not the worst thing in the world. I wouldn't want to completely reform it. But
Reem, surely the coronation is a celebration of everything. And I just don't know why we would be celebrating refugees in the NHS at a time when actually this is a really good time. I mean, the NHS is in terminal crisis at the moment. Why would we be putting that at the heart of the coronation?
It's a great time to distract from the issues of the NHS. I mean, look, I think that the coronation is supposed to be about loving British identity and British tradition and history. And actually, I remember reading it this morning and seeing the fact that, you know, okay, we're going to be more inclusive, include LGBT icons in the sort of celebration. I thought actually that's not too bad. And I thought minorities. Since when was the NHS a protected characteristic? Like that's not a thing. It's not on the Equality Act. Okay, it's not something we should be celebrating specifically. But also, I think what's interesting is how much it's been reduced. You know, 1953 there was about 8,000, 9,000 guests attending at Westminster Abbey. Now it's being reduced to just above 2,000.
I think that's sad.
It is sad. Where is the celebration of tradition? The reason why we love the royal families, we love the frivolity, we love this sort of the garnish and the gold.
Well, you want to get your best silverware out, don't you? You want the gold coach.
We love it. We love all the sort of frivolity of the royal family, and actually culling that, I think, is a huge mistake.
So, Jonathan, how much of this do you think has been put out to test the water? And that's what I'm just wondering in some of these headlines. So, for example, the LGBT choir. I mean, OK, fine, but I don't, you know, surely it's about having a choir.
Look, I agree with you, but I think it's very easy just living in the UK to lose perspective of sort of what a privilege
That's a good point.
To, you know, be able to be, for example, gay in this country, and, you know, under law it's acceptable and it's legal and you can get married and etc. And in a lot of countries we forget it's completely not allowed. It's a crime. And so, you know, being able to stand up and say we have this privilege, we have this honour of being able to do that in this country. You know, we take on people who are, you know, fleeing war and persecution. We take in people, you know, we allow people who are deaf to sing. Even 50 years ago, or in any other country almost, you know, being disabled, you do not have the same access to support, the same access to goods and resources you have in this country. You know, there may be problems, and there are definitely problems with all of these areas and regions and things we could do better, for sure. But saying that, you know, just as a country, we have done these in a way and made progress in a way which lots of other countries haven't, and that is something in some ways I think to celebrate.
So the question is, will Meghan and Harry be there?
Can we go one day without mentioning those two? Honestly, I'm so sick of it. I mean, I hope they're not there. I think they've shown such a huge amount of disrespect to the royal family. They don't deserve to be there.
So Rennie had a great point. She's like, the reason they cut it to 2000 is they'll go to Harry and Meghan. Oh, I'm sorry you didn't make the list.
That's good.
Yeah, but hopefully, I mean, I'm hoping it will be a great celebration of the United
me
Kingdom.
too,
And indeed the Commonwealth.
Yeah, there's monuments lit up. There's, you know, amazing dance troupes.
The laser show. I thought that's quite the lights display. That'll be quite cool.
Yeah, the whole thing will be fantastic. Right, should we talk about something else? Nadeem Zahawi. I mean, obviously, I think he's in serious trouble, isn't he?
Well, I think it goes back to sort of what I was saying about, you know, the idea of Tory sleaze, one rule for them, another for us. It's, you know, 3 point something million according to a Guardian investigation, which is quite a lot of money. It's
I heard
a
it was
little
higher,
bit more than
4.1 million, or 4.2 million.
But he's back allegedly, 3.7 million it was originally, but he's paid back 30% of that amount allegedly, around 1.1 million. I mean, we were laughing this morning saying, oh yeah, we often forget to.
Yeah, it's just a little bit careless, you know. Like,
a few million, whatever. No, I do think I think the sort of the idea behind Tory sleaze, I think, is the difficult situation, right? We've got I mean, how many MPs last year did we have that were accused of sexual assault and sexual misconduct? And then now we've got these tax issues. I mean, it is really difficult.
But he was Chancellor. He was head of the HMRC. That's what makes it even worse.
So ironic. I remember the first week I came on here was like the Chris Pincher scandal, and we were like talking about, oh, there's so many scandals, so much. They can't get any worse. And then lo and behold,
And it
It's got worse. Yeah, no, it is bad. I think that, look, with the future, on a serious note, the future of the Conservative Party is sort of at hand, where actually, we sort of think about accountability and conservatism and this idea that we understand how to manage our finances. The Conservative Party is the party of the economy, when our own ex-chancellor doesn't know how to handle his own tax. I mean, that is quite shocking.
And let's talk about Rishi Sunak, because for me, as the election approaches, and clearly the parties are now in election mode, you can see it in terms of the way they're putting their policies together, and I believe the Conservatives are actually having an emergency meeting about the threats that are being given to them by other parties. But Rishi Sunak this morning has said that he will fix Britain's broken emergency services. He acknowledges that people are being failed. We obviously have the huge NHS strike, which is taking place on Monday. Confidence in the police, I think, is pretty much rock bottom. You can't get an ambulance. I was reading this morning about ambulance response times in England were the worst last month. If you had a stroke, a burn or chest pain, and I'm speaking as a doctor, it took 93 minutes to get an ambulance. It is a catastrophic mess, isn't it, Jonathan?
It is, absolutely. And the number of people waiting is more than 12 hours in A&E, with a new record of 54,532. I mean, good luck to him, Rishi. I really hope he does. He hasn't come out with the proper policy proposals to necessarily how he's going to do so. There's still the strikes, the union strikes. There's teachers who are walking out. There's university lecturers, my university lecturers who are, walking out.
How do you feel about that?
It's awful. Like, I'm missing time, which I'm paying a huge amount of money for.
You're paying?
Yeah.
So, therefore, I don't think they should walk out.
I think there was an Oxford student that recorded that they pay £300 an hour for a seminar.
Is that right?
I mean,
when you break it down, the amount of hours that we actually get. I mean, for me personally, I had the COVID lockdowns during my first year of university.
I remember.
My second year of university, I had strikes after strikes after strikes, and I graduate this year. Now we've got more strikes. So my entire 3 years have been completely ruined.
So you really should have a refund.
Well, I think that paying £9,000 a year, I really do hope I do get at least a partial refund. But I think what's actually quite interesting about this is the sort of minimum service levels that Sunak wants to put in the public sector. We should extend that also to universities. If we're not getting our minimum service in order for us to actually get, I mean, what's the point? During COVID, our professors, a lot of them actually used pre-recorded lectures from the previous year, so they actually were just sort of sitting in their rooms doing absolutely nothing, and then sort of expected to pay that £9,000 again.
And what's the justification for doing that? Because quite frankly, you could sit in front of a webcam, couldn't you, and do a live seminar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the justification is essentially that it's different times during COVID, but there's nobody can deny the fact that we have not received the education that previous years have. And actually, back then it used to be free. So the fact that we're now paying £9,000 and we're getting an even worse service, it's just absurd.
And Jonathan, how does that make you feel? You've worked it out, £300 for each. I mean, that's ridiculous.
No, it is ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. And the question is, if unfortunately, I don't think there will be a refund. I just don't think it will happen. But the question of where the money comes from, the question of settling the disputes between the academics and the government in terms of pay.
But surely there should be a contract between the student and the university, and you really should have provisions like you would with any contract. If you don't fulfil it, then clearly you are owed money back.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, having that sort of provision, because you're paying for a service. You can't simply say, we're not going to provide anything. Thankfully there is still some service there, and I still am going into university and I'm enjoying it, but it's really difficult.
Well, it's that argument that it is exactly why I support the government's move for the minimum service level. I think that the reason why I support that is actually when we're paying something, we're paying our tax dollars, and we're not actually receiving that public service. So actually, I think what's interesting is, I think, unless we get that tax rebate, we should be receiving those public services.
I think it is important, though, to listen at the same time to the lecturers in some ways and say, because that, in theory, could work very well, but then, it could also provide the government an excuse to, slash lecturers, pay wages enormous amounts. I don't think it would be fair necessarily to say, okay, you just have to carry on teaching at that level. So I think you have to be careful of that sort of loophole that could come about.
Let's just move on very quickly, because time's against us, and talk about one other thing, which is this is Stephen Rubin, who has published more than 4,000 books, including 23 of John Grisham's novels, also Brown's Da Vinci Code. He says diversity box ticking could mean the next John Grisham or Dan Brown is lost. He says this is all knee-jerk response to diversity inclusion, and therefore, ironically, has made publishers less diverse. Is it time that we got rid of all this diversity inclusion and move past it? Because we now must be in a position where we all acknowledge that it has to be part of everyday life. Are we actually stifling our freedom?
I think in a way you could definitely say yes. I think it's a really, really complicated topic in the sense you do have to be careful. There is still examples of discrimination and ways in which, people aren't accommodated for. Is that right? Absolutely not. But at the same time, it's important you don't have levels of, positive discrimination to an extent that you sacrifice huge amounts of talent for simply box ticking, for simply saying, we need a woman in this role, or we need someone in this role, so we'll sacrifice you. Even if they don't have the competency to do the role as well as someone else could, I think that, again, is also a problem. You can't say, it's very easy for, some middle-class white man in the middle of on a board to say, yeah, we're going to only select this branch of categories and candidates. It doesn't really affect him, it doesn't affect his career.
No,
I absolutely hate the term positive discrimination. I mean, discrimination is discrimination. The amount of times I've been told that I only got where I am, or I'm only at university because of my ethnicity, or because I'm a woman, or because I'm young, I hate it so much.
So patronising.
It's patronising, but it's also actually, you never know as an ethnic minority, or as a person of, a person of colour, or a member of the LGBT community. You never know if you got there just because of your protected characteristic, or actually if you got there on merit. And I think that we need to get rid of all of this. Actually, if the book is good, publish it. If it isn't, then you don't.
Well,
exactly.
Very good common sense, you see. That's why you both need to be in Westminster. Thank you very much indeed to both of you again, as always, Jonathan Gibson and Reem Ibrahim. And they were, of course, our future politics panel.
The Future Politics Panel.
You see, such common sense taught by those so young. After the break, I'll be